Like most bandits, these men had come during the harvest. These pillagers were brutal men of war, with no creed except to feed off the honest men and to defile all they touched. These particular raiders, however, were not just content to steal. They wanted to bloody their swords and ravage the women who hid in the boarded-up farmhouse. The savage men whooped and crowed, shaking their weapons as they moved about the house, looking for an easy way in. Suddenly, the sound of thunder came from the mountain. Griffin, a tall, bearded man, clad in leather armor and mail, turned and saw with dismay as a large boulder came bouncing down the mountainside. "Landslide!" he shouted in warning. The raiders quickly jumped away from the front door as the massive stone smashed into the house. For a moment it seemed like a freak occurrence, but then a small stone about the size of a fist fell out of the sky, striking one of the raiders on top of the helmet. The man reeled back, cursing. The savage bandits looked toward the mountain and saw a man standing on the high terrace, looking down at them. "That was no landslide! That fool is rolling rocks down on us!" one of the raiders snarled. "Forget him! He'll not come down here," Griffin spat. "He doesn't even have a weapon." But as soon as he said this, the stranger moved into the barley field and picked up a scythe dropped by one of the field hands. "Ignore him. He's just a field hand. We'll deal with him when we need to. Break down the doors. We've got pretty wenches to wed." However, the other men paused and pointed wordily. "I don't think he's a farmhand, Chief," one said. Griffin merely grunted. "Ha! How do you figure, Grimlock? He ain't got a sword, and he's completely alone. He's just trying to draw us away." But the stranger kept walking toward them, descending down into the lower wheat terraces that had already been harvested. Grimlock shook his head. "If he was a farm boy, he would be running toward us in a rage or a panic. He's too calm." Griffin grunted. "You scare too easy. He's just a fool," he growled as he brandished his axe. "A dead fool," he added. "Mulak, Shamra, as he comes down, flank him," he commanded. "Yes, Chief," they said in unison as they split off into separate directions. Grimlock and the others stood back and watched as Griffin went out to meet the stranger, who now set the blade of the scythe onto the ground and held up his right hand in a peaceful gesture. "What a fool, Grimlock?" one of the raiders said. "Don't he know we ain't got no rules? The chief will cut him down like it's nothing." "Oh! My eyes! My eyes!" Griffin cursed in outrage as he stumbled backward. "That pig kicks dirt in my eyes!" Hearing their chief in distress, Mulak and Shumra broke cover from behind the large bushels of wheat and attacked the stranger. But when it seemed like he would be hacked into pieces, the clove leapt onto Griffin's shoulders and drove the curved blade of the scythe right into his diaphragm and sent it through his spine. Anchoring himself with the staff, he drove the chief straight into the ground, crushing Griffin's ribcage with a crunch. Caught off guard, Mulak and Shemra leapt down from the terrace in hot pursuit, but stopped when a clove ripped the curved blade from the mangled body of their leader. Smoldering yellow eyes gazed back at them as he held the scythe dripping with blood. They hesitated only for a moment, and it was their last. For as Moloch raised his axe, the clove thrust the end of the wooden staff upward and dropped the bandit in a single stroke that shattered his jaw. Moloch fell to the ground, choking on his own blood as it gushed out of his mouth. In one fluid move, the clove whirled around and ruthlessly swept the second bandit's feet right out from beneath him with the heavy, curved blade, flaying the flesh and meat right off the bone as he flipped it over backwards. "Demon, stay away from me!" Shamrock screamed in agony, raising his battle-axe to fend the clove off as he hovered over him. The clove sidestepped around the axe and mercilessly drove the end of the scythe into his throat, crushing his windpipe. Shamrock dropped his axe and held his hand to his throat as he lay wheezing for breath in mute terror. The clove cruelly flipped the razor edge of the scythe around to the back of his neck and kicked the man's face into the dirt and pulled sharply with the scythe like a reverse guillotine, severing the man's head from his shoulders and sending it rolling past the bloodied but still very much alive bandit on his left. Seeing the horrid expression of anguish on Shamrock's severed head, Moloch fell backward and stared up at the yellow-eyed warrior in terror. As the clove bent down to pick up the axe, Moloch threw down his weapon and shook his head, making inaudible whimpers as blood still gushed down his face, soaking his shirt and trousers. The rest of the bandits watched in horror as Moloch staggered to his feet and ran for his life. Suddenly there was a loud whirring sound as the battle-axe flew through the air. His comrades called out in warning, but it was too late. The clove sent the axe flying right into the back of his head. Fragments of bone and brain matter flew from his skull as Moloch's body fell like a rag doll onto the ground. A mere 10 paces from the farmhouse, axe head buried inside the back of his head for all to see. The clove clenched his teeth and glared back at the raiders as he held up the scythe so that it menacingly reflected the light into their eyes. Grimlock and the other bandits stared at the warrior and the scythe, still dripping with blood. His bright yellow eyes gazed right back at them. "His eyes, they're like the harvest moon," whispered one. "It's an evil spirit," gasped a second. "No, worse, he's a demon," said another. The clove looked at Grimlock and stretched out his index finger, calling him out to battle. The bandits suddenly went silent. All eyes fell on the bearded man. Grimlock's face turned as pale as a ghost. The earth crunched noisily beneath the big man's feet as he took a step back. "He's the Reaper," he quavered, and as soon as he said this, several men in the back of their ranks dropped their weapons and ran off. Grimlock whirled around in panic, watching his men scatter in separate directions and run down the sloping green mountainside. He turned again, looking up at the man holding the bloody scythe. Great drops of sweat poured down his face. Grimlock cast his blade down and fled. The clove let out a shaky breath as he scanned the hillside. The chipped white wooden storm shutters creaked slightly open from the upper window of the house. "Oh, what do you want with us farm folk, foul angel of death?" came an old man's worried voice. The clove blinked in surprise and then suddenly became self-aware, and blood stained his clothes. He glanced down at the bloody sigh and let it fall to the ground. "If you're offering, I'm hungry," he admitted, trying to smile and appear friendly. "I'm not offering you anything, and you're not invited in this house. We have placed charms at every door and window against evil beings," the man barked back. The Clove gave the superstitious farmer a questionable glance. "That certainly didn't stop them," he commented. "Besides, I don't want to come inside. I'm just passing through." "Good! Be off, cursed demon!" the farmer shouted from his window. The Clove smiled sadly. "I hope your charms work better next time they come," he replied as he turned away. "Wait!" shouted the farmer. "We can spare some bread and cheese," he added. The Clove perked up at the mention of food and turned around, looking up at the window. "I meant wait in the barn," the man clarified quickly. The Clove took a step back from the smashed patio and glanced over at the barn, and then nodded politely. He did his best to wash in the hearth trough. A little while later, a tall man with a dark bushy beard came out of the house with a small sack of food and a bundle of clothes. He set them on an empty wooden barrel. "You can stay in the barn for the night if you like." "I'm not a raider," the Clove said, hoping to put the man a little more at ease. "I really don't know what you are," he snapped. The Clove fought to keep a straight face. "I'm not a spirit either," he assured him. The farmer eyed him warily and tossed the Clove the sack of bread and cheese. "If you're truly flesh and blood, then eat," he challenged. The Clove grinned and pulled out the loaf of bread. He broke it in half and offered some to the elderly man, but he just watched him sternly. Shrugging, the Clove wolfed down the soft bread and grunted approvingly as he reached to the sack for the block of cheese. Thank you," was all he could manage to say with his mouth full. The farmer watched carefully to see if he swallowed. Once satisfied, he tilted his hat and gave the Clove a slight nod, though suspicion lingered in his eyes. "It's the least we can do," he said, but his tone was far from welcoming. "Has a group of knights ridden through these parts by any chance?" the Clove inquired. The farmer's frown deepened. "No one comes to this valley unless they find their way through the hidden pass, and those that do are up to no good," he declared crossly. The Clove paused and then swallowed a mouthful of bread and cheese, giving the man a perplexed look. Surely it was one thing to be suspicious of strangers, but this seemed to be a little bit presumptuous. "I do not wish to bring about trouble for anyone," he assured him calmly. The farmer looked over at the Clove with disdain. "Noble words for a thief," he remarked. Clove's sharp yellow eyes narrowed, and he stood up straight and glared angrily at the man. "What have I stolen from you?" he demanded. The farmer didn't so much as blink. "Then who are you, and why are you here?" he demanded. The Clove's chest swelled with pride. "I am a Clove, and I seek only a single white lily from the dragon's sacred pond. That is all." The old man snorted. "And what do you have to give in return for such a valuable flower? Are you willing to pay the price, or is somebody else willing to pay it for you?" The Clove gripped his chin, and worried lines creased his face. He hadn't thought that far along. The farmer continued. "You saved our lives, so you are entitled to our charity. But if you steal from the dragon, he'll visit his wrath upon us and the whole valley. And what will I give him with my crops burned, my daughters, my wife?" The Clove stared at the farmer in horror and disbelief. "You would sacrifice your own family? For this?" he gasped. The farmer glared at the Clove as tears welled up in his eyes. No, I would rather die than give up my wife or my daughters. But it is not up to me. The dragon decides what he takes if we cannot pay our tribute. Leclos shook his head angrily. Why hasn't your village driven the dragon out? Don't you have any warriors? But when he asked this, the farmer's eyes grew wide, and he stared at Leclos as if he had said something utterly ridiculous. Heaven forbid! Without the dragon, our fields would be barren. The village would starve without his magic. Leclos blinked, not really sure how to react to this. But what about your wife and children? What about the others who cannot pay? The farmer shrugged. It is a necessary evil. Without the dragon, we would all starve anyway. As long as we keep him happy, we live in peace. Speechless, Leclos could only nod, trying to comprehend this new concept. Listen, stranger, you can stay the night in the barn, but then go back to where you came from in the morning, he said before returning to the house. I'll be sure not to wear out my welcome, Leclos muttered under his breath. He finished eating and left the barn to wash in the stream. The water was cold, but it felt good to rinse the smell of the bog off his body. The rough gray tunic, most likely made from a goat hair, was still a little big and itchy, but it was dry, and the pants were a little loose, but Leclos didn't mind. It was better loose than too tight, and he used his leather belt to hold them up. Fully dressed, Leclos walked barefoot over the green slope, carrying his wet socks and leather boots. He watched as the field hands slowly began to trickle back up the terrace to tend to the dead. Leclos took shelter in the barn loft and made no gesture to help or interfere. The last thing he wanted was to create more of a stir than he already had. Dusk quickly settled in, and Leclos lay back on the mound of straw and let out a heavy sigh as he drifted off to sleep. Early the next morning he woke to the sound of a cock crowing, greeting the first rays of the sun that breached the jagged mountain peaks. Leclos grunted as he sluggishly rolled out of the warm mound of hay and picked the straw out of his hair. Not wanting to stay on the farmer's land longer than he had to, he quickly washed his face and set off toward the trail that had led to the village, where he spotted the princess's royal caravan off in the distance on the main road, riding towards the same village. Not wishing to miss the caravan, Leclos hastily picked up his pace to an easy jog. The buildings were largely made of stone with sod roofing. The small village was bustling with life and excitement as crowds lined the streets to see the approaching royal convoy. Leclos noted the seeming unease as men in red robes came out of a large building in the town center, accompanied by soldiers. Eager to get a closer look at what was going on, he pushed through the masses to watch as the soldiers went out to meet the caravan. Just when one of the robed men gestured to his direction, Leclos cursed under his breath as the soldiers veered off the path and came right toward him. The locals quickly moved aside, but the men continued past him and approached a woman wearing a black petticoat. She glanced toward Leclos. Her eyes were filled with terror, and she seemed equally as surprised that he had not been confronted. Leclos stepped back into the crowd as the elderly man in the red robe somberly approached the woman, who was holding the hands of two children. "I have not seen you at the village gatherings in some time, widow woman," he stated. The woman in black whispered, I have been working." The man in the red robe nodded. "Wonderful. At long last I see you have come to give tribute to the dragon for all that he has prospered you with." The widow's face went deathly pale as her trembling white hand slowly held up the coppers in her palm. I only have enough to buy bread. It's all I have," she stammered. The man in red grew somber once more. "You know that the dragon only accepts gold. Are you certain that there is nothing you can spare?" he inquired. The Clove watched in shock as the woman reluctantly pulled a thin gold wedding ring from her finger and placed it in the man's hand. But what happened next shocked him even more. "That is enough for the life of one of your children. I will be merciful and allow you to keep your son if you so choose," the man in red said. The woman's eyes widened in horror, and she threw herself down on the ground, weeping at the man's feet. "No, you cannot make another choose between her children. Please take me instead. I beg you, please," she begged, clinging onto the man's robe. But he merely stepped back and yanked his robe from her hands. "That is nonsense. If you sacrifice yourself for them, how will they eat? They'd even be a greater burden on the village. Take your coppers, woman, and buy some bread, and give your son a double portion, so that he may grow strong enough to help you through your hard times. This evil is really a kindness and a blessing from the great dragon, for you starve even now to feed 2 mouths besides your own." A young soldier somberly pushed aside the woman's son and grabbed the girl. The Clove stepped in and clapped the soldier heartily on the metal chest plate, saying, "Good man, surely you would help a widow in need, wouldn't you?" The young soldier stared blankly at the wild-eyed stranger, and then he looked over at the man in red for direction. "The debt can only be paid by the debtor. This cannot be undone, or else I would pay it myself," he said mournfully, at least in a somber enough tone to sound genuinely saddened by the unfortunate circumstance. The Clove clenched his teeth and let out a tense breath. Before the soldier could draw his blade, the Clove quickly shook his right hand. "It was good of you to try," he said. "You're a better man than most. Not every soldier would try to help someone in need." The confused young soldier tried to smile and nodded quickly as he felt his hand crack under the stranger's iron grip, and hurriedly took several steps away from the wild-eyed stranger. The Clove turned to address the priest in red. "What if I took it? How much does she owe?" he demanded. The woman turned and looked at the Clove as she pulled both her children under her arms like a mothered hen. The priest frowned and shook his head. "You are not related. You cannot take what is not yours to pay." "I am her brother," he announced, grinning. "She has no brother." The Clove grimaced. "Second brother. We are engaged," he added quickly. "What?" the priest said. "Marriages can only be approved through the village council. When did this occur?" The Clove shrugged. "Recently." The priest folded his arms over his chest sternly and studied the stranger. "I think you are lying. You are ignorant of our ways and rituals, and you seek out of pity to meddle in an affair that is not yours," the priest declared crossly. The Clove took a deep breath to calm his nerves. "You're right. I do not know your ways. But this really is my bride," he insisted. The priest crooked his brow, and his hands remained crossed. "Entertain me, then, stranger. I have known this woman since childhood. If you are truly engaged, what is her name?" he challenged. The villagers went silent, and the woman began to weep louder than before as she fought to keep the soldiers from taking her screaming daughter from her arms. "Ah, by your silence, I see you are indeed a liar," the priest said, scowling. "Tell me, do you have a gold coin to offer up for your own life?" The Clove's yellow eyes blazed like liquid metal. "I'll feed your heart to the pigs," he cursed. Lunging at the priest, but 2 soldiers stepped in the way. The Clove snarled as he tackled them both down into the open street. Arrest him! The priest shouted, but the soldiers were already running to aid their comrades. Suddenly, a voice the Clove recognized called out, "Stop!" It was the princess. The Clove whirled around to see Princess Greela riding between Rukith and Preston at the front of the caravan. "You dare attack one of my servants?" she demanded angrily, and then she hefted a heavy sack of gold coins. "This will pay for us, and for the woman's child," she declared as she tossed the purse at the priest's feet. The Clove growled as he pulled free from the soldier's grip. "Let the girl go, or I'll get you, you spineless worm!" he snarled at the priest, but the soldiers pushed him back. "You may keep your servant," the priest began, "as he is your responsibility. But you are no longer in your own land, and you will not meddle in our affairs." Rows of soldiers, joined by dozens of villagers carrying clubs, scythes, sickles, and pitchforks and axes, all ready to defend the priests in the red robes. The priests brandished their own weapons, a strange, curved, sickle-like sword, a ceremonial khopesh. Before the situation got out of hand, and seeing that they were outnumbered on all sides, the princess quickly complied. "We are not here to interfere in your ways," she assured him. The priest nodded reverently. "For one so young, you are very wise. Your people are welcome to stay as long as you need to." Hearing her words, the Clove's heart fell. He knew he could not fight them all. He didn't even have a weapon. As he was thinking about this, the Green Knight approached him. "How did you beat us here? On foot," he demanded. "We've been riding for 8 days." Gruen's face was pale from blood loss, and the sweat ran down his face from fever as he held his bandaged stump to his chest. "Shortcut," the Clove replied in a level tone, though he was also baffled by this, as he had only arrived in the valley yesterday. The Green Knight glared at him untrustingly. "I see your hand has recovered well from our last encounter." The Clove flexed his hand. It was still a little swollen, but at the moment he was too angry to really care. "Better than yours," he spat coldly. Gruen's sleepless eyes glared at the pyro, and for a moment he made as if he was about to get off his saddle to fight the insubordinate commoner, but then Rukith's strong hand pushed him back into the saddle. "Leave him," the Red Knight said. "You're not well." Greela looked at Gruen wardly. "We're going to stay the night. We need to get you to a doctor," she declared. But Gruen only scowled bitterly. "No, I'll be fine," he barked back, but his voice was hoarse and his face was deathly pale. "As your princess, I commend you, Sir Gruen," Greela said sternly. The Green Knight paused for a moment and finally lowered his head, nodding silently. The princess smiled sadly as she glanced at Gruen's bloody stump. "We will find an inn where I can prepare myself for tomorrow," she declared, and then turned to the Clove. "Did you gain what you desired from the oracle?" she asked. The Clove's sharp yellow eyes, still burning with anger, darted up at the princess. "More or less," he said, not sure if he was wise to disclose the true reason he had come to the valley. The princess let out a troubled sigh and elegantly slid off her horse. "Would you walk with me a while?" she asked, as she passed the reins to one of her servants. The Clove thought for a moment and replied bluntly, "I don't feel like it." "She just saved your worthless life, you little savage!" Rukith exploded, but the princess quickly held up her hand for him to be silent. "I wish to speak to you," she said calmly. "I did save your life. Again," she added. The Clove clenched his teeth. You also hit me over the head with a shovel, he reminded her. Creela gently brushed her hand across her face, pulling a strand of hair from her lips to keep from smiling too noticeably. That was a very complicated situation. I like to keep things simple, the Clove replied dryly. The princess smiled, but it was a sad smile. Perhaps I can help you, she offered. I never asked you for help, and I don't want it. Creela's lips tightened, and her sky-blue eyes hardened, but she kept her voice calm and crisp. Well, if that is what you wish, then I'll take back my gold and simplify things for you. And you can go back to brawling in the street, she suggested. The Clove's eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened. Creela gave a slight nod in approval. Walk with me, she said firmly, enough so that the defiant warrior knew that declining was not an option. The Clove's knuckles cracked loudly as he glared at the knights who were listening before turning to follow the princess. Once she was certain the knights could not hear, she turned and asked, Was the oracle able to help you? Did you find your name? He studied the princess for a second. My name is Clove. Creela smiled. I'm glad for you, Clove, she said, and then studied him hard. Why did you come here? Clove paused. I was engaged, he said at last. The princess frowned. Was? She inquired. The Clove merely shrugged. Didn't work out, he replied, returning her speculative gaze. Creela frowned again. She knew the Clove was lying about being engaged, but she could tell that he knew, she knew, and he didn't care. He simply was not going to give her a straight answer. She finally stopped dancing around the subject and demanded, Clove, are you here to stop me? Clove blinked. From what? He asked, with a surprise in his voice. I am to give myself to the Dragon Prince. The Clove tilted his head. It suddenly dawned on him why her brother had been trying to stop her. I only seek a white lily from the dragon's sacred pond. I'm not here to stop you from marrying the dragon. She shook her head and explained, Surely you know that dragons are too proud to couple with us mortals. I am payment in blood and in gold as a sacrifice to the dragon for the life of my father. The Clove took a step back. I don't understand. Creela took a deep breath. I'd rather give myself to the dragon than become the 10th wife of some fat pig 1,000 miles away. The Clove ran his hand through his hair. Then why don't you just leave? Creela glared at him. I am not only a woman, I am a princess. I don't have those freedoms. This is my chance to be part of something greater, and my brother in Shadow did not understand this. Maybe you cannot either. You make it sound so wonderful, he grunted. Creela nodded. It is. She paused thoughtfully and then continued. It is something bigger than us all. I wish the children were as brave as you are, he added coldly. Creela frowned, realizing that he was still brooding over the little girl who was also to be sacrificed. I did what I could for them, but I cannot change the ways things are, she explained. This has been going on since the Great Wars. Clove clenched his teeth and turned away. If I had a band of warriors following me, I'd change things. Creela glared at him, knowing the comment had been directed toward her. Most people wish to change things they do not understand. These people have their ways. Perhaps you should respect that and leave things the way they are. She replied sharply and then recovered her composure. I must go and prepare myself for tomorrow's ritual. Goodbye. The closed, yellow eyes blazed, but his words were cold as winter's frost. Die in your own way, he replied, never once raising his voice, but each word was laced with venom. He turned his back and walked further down the path, only to come across the same widow woman who was staring at the stone walls where her daughter had been taken. The Clove walked up to the widow. Why didn't you leave the valley? Why do people stay here with this injustice? He demanded. The woman looked down sorrowfully. Things aren't always so simple, she said. If we left, we could starve on the road or be attacked by bandits or torn apart by wolves. She smiled sadly and placed her hand on the Clove's shoulder. If I had your strength, I could change things, she said before turning and walking away. The Clove grimaced. The widow's words pricked his heart and stuck in his throat. He had said the same thing to the princess. Why were things so complicated? Things should not be this way. He felt utterly alone as he wandered aimlessly through the busy streets. Things should be simpler. Surely evil was not necessary for good to exist. But was it so complicated after all? Was the outcome more important than keeping peace? He had no weapon. If he did free the children of the village, the dragons would doubtless unleash devastation on it. If he stole the lily and escaped, he would still leave behind destruction. If he fought the dragon and killed it, the valley would dry up and the people would starve. Clove wandered out of the village and traveled up onto the green hillside overlooking the valley below. He knew he could not leave, but he also doubted the dragon would simply give him the sacred lily. Never before could he remember feeling so vexed in his heart, not even when he met Kida. He wondered then what evil he had done, but now he was forced to either do what must be done or just give up and walk away. Perhaps the old boatman had been right. Perhaps this curse was a blessing. Perhaps he should walk away. But what about the widow's daughter? Could he walk away from that and let a little child die? A Clove knew it was too late. He could not simply free the girl, for her mother was not strong enough to leave the valley, and the priests would simply take her back. Surely it was the widow's fault. She had the opportunity to leave, but her fear crippled her, and she did nothing. This was not his mess to be involved in. It would have been better to risk the wolves than stay and hand her children over to the dragon. The sun beat down. The Clove sat down on the soft green grass and let out an agonized sigh before settling back. He only intended to rest for a while, but then he awoke to see the stars shining above him. He sat up and was shocked to see a woman standing before him. Her hair was red, and her robe was whiter than snow. "Hello, Le Clove," she whispered. Her voice was familiar, but he regarded her suspiciously. "I know you, but who are you?" he asked, all the while his left hand secretly shifted through the earth, searching for a stone as he eyed the strange woman. "Fear not, for this is only a dream." The Clove frowned. "It feels real enough." "I am Nabetha," she said. "I am younger than when you knew me, but I am still very much alive." The Clove shook his head. "Why have you come here?" "To wake you." The Clove frowned again. I'm awake now, aren't I? Nobetha smiled. You question yourself? Awake now and see. Leclose's eyes snapped open and he leapt to his feet. The woman was gone, and the sun was beginning to rise. Leclose looked down into the valley from where he stood. He saw the men in red carrying a heavy box along the path leading out of the village. A line of young children dressed in white followed the priests. The princess was behind them. She, too, was dressed in white, and her face was covered by a veil. The knights followed behind her, as well as many villagers, all wearing black sackcloth. The Clove watched as they made their way out of the village. They journeyed toward a great stone circle. At the base of the small hill was a small lake, which the Clove noticed was surrounded by white lilies. Suddenly, a loud bell sounded from the village. The soldiers, accompanying the priest, turned and rode swiftly back to the city. From far off, Leclose saw a dark figure riding a great black stallion into the village. A dozen soldiers tried to block his way, but the Black Knight lowered his lance and smashed through their ranks, trampling everyone in his path. Leclose's eyes grew wide in wonder as he watched Rooketh wheel around to face the oncoming Black Knight. Clouds of dust rose up behind their horses as the two men charged at one another. A great sound, louder than thunder, echoed through the entire valley as their armor clashed. Preston, Shaid, and Elkhorn all exclaimed in horror as they saw Rooketh fall off his horse, with Shadow's lance driven through his chest. The three knights drew their swords and cried out for vengeance. Never once slowing his pace, Shadow drew his own sword and rode forward to do battle. Chapter 10. The Knight's Path. You have been listening to The Dragon Scourge, written by M.R.R. Lopez. If you'd like to support the channel, you can find this book on Amazon and Kindle. And if you don't want to miss Chapter 10, click that thing, like that thing, and press that thing.